dispute. However, this has triggered concerns from the outside world on China-U.S. Economic relations. So what is your take on this issue? Thank you for your question. Recently, the U.S. has imposed a series of wrong actions on China-U.S. relations, which escalated China-U.S. pressure in trade relations. This has damaged the interests of consumers from both China and the U.S., but also will damage the global economy. A few days ago, the OECD downtuned its economic expectations for the global economy, and it said this phenomenon has threatened the investment and growth in the future, and there is a shared concern in the global community. Thank you. Thank you from Xinhua News. We noticed that on the U.S. time, May 22nd, the U.S. Non-Proliferation Bureau announced a sanction on these companies that provide products to China and warned against this export, this tech cooperation with China. Thank you for your question. We have noticed the behavior of the U.S. Recently, the frequent actions from the U.S. side to combat Chinese enterprises, we have noticed their behaviors, and the U.S. abused its sanctions over Chinese enterprises and individuals. We seriously condemn this behavior from the U.S. side, and we welcome the U.S. side's action to promote the bilateral cooperation in trade. The Chinese side will take necessary measures to safeguard the legitimate rights of the Chinese enterprises. Thank you. Thank you from Phoenix TV. We noticed that the U.S. government announced the export ban on of Huawei, and you also mentioned the Chinese side will take necessary measures to protect Chinese enterprises. So what will be these measures? Thank you for your question. Regarding the measures from the U.S. side, we have talked seriously with the U.S. side on these issues. This is an action of bullyism. The best response is that the Chinese enterprises continue to develop themselves. The Chinese government continues to deepen reform and opening up, so as to provide a more favorable and stable as well as fair and convenient business environment for our enterprises, so that our enterprises will be better prepared for the risks in the market and also survive and improve themselves in the international competition and enable themselves to provide better services and products of more variety to the consumers. We are confident and that we are able to protect our enterprises' legitimate rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Bloomberg News. I'll speak in English. My colleague will translate. Have you heard any more details about the U.S. negotiators coming to Beijing for any further discussions? And also, does China have any preconditions for any further discussions with the U.S.? I know that Liu He said that there are 3 conditions for any eventual deal with the U.S., but does that also apply to the discussions? Like, do you expect to see those implemented or promised by the U.S. before you even talk to them, or is that just preconditions for any final deal? Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
您好，彭博新闻社记者提问。我们的问题是，近期有没有美国代表团还会到中国来重启谈判？那中方对重启谈判是否还有兴趣？还有就是中方对重启谈判还有没有什么的条件、先决的条件和要求？我们知道刘鹤副总理将中方的3个关切都明确的表达了出来。那么这个3个关切是重启谈判的先决条件，还是形成协议的先决条件？谢谢。
关于这个问题，我一会儿再做出回应。
Regarding this issue, I will give you the answer later.
这样，我简单的回应一下。近来，美方单方面不断升级。
I'd like to answer your question briefly.
各种动作不断。
And recently, the U.S. unilaterally escalated the trade friction with China and put in place a series of measures to damage the China-U.S. trade negotiations. And China's stance for the trade negotiation is always clear and firm. If the U.S. wants to continue with the negotiation, the U.S. needs to show its sincerity and correct its wrong behavior. Only in the way of equal footing will the negotiation go on. The cooperation must be based on the principles, and for any negotiation, we have our bottom line. We will not give up our bottom line and principles. Thank you. Thank you. From National Radio. There is a report that the U.S. intelligence authority held press briefings reporting the risks of China's intelligence agency. Thank you for your question. We have noticed this report. Over the past days, some people from the U.S. side disseminated and made up the stories that China threatens the U.S. national security and the U.S. enterprises. However, we are confident that we do not do this. I believe the U.S. companies that get involved in working with China know how China is. And we have devoted huge efforts in improving the business environment for foreign enterprises. This will not change, and we will not change our action to protect the legitimate rights of U.S. companies in China, as well as the fact that we will keep improving the market potential for the U.S. business and global business that want to do business in China. From National Radio, Voice of China, there is a report that Google cut ties with Huawei and will further suspend the technical support of the Android system to Huawei. So what is your take on this issue, and will this spread to other enterprises in China? Thank you for your question. Well, this is an action from the U.S. government. It's a combat on the Chinese enterprises. This will damage the normal business cooperation between the enterprises on both countries, but it will also damage and threaten the global supply chain. China firmly stands against this U.S. behavior and hope the U.S. side will correct its dangerous action. The Chinese side will follow closely the situation and be prepared for future developments. Thank you. Thank you from China News Service. We noticed reports that the U.S. Land Security Authority saying that Chinese UAVs will pose threats to the U.S. in terms of the data security. And any Chinese tech company that brings data to the U.S. will pose threat to the U.S. What is your take on this? Thank you for your question. We noticed this report.
拿不出任何具体证据的指控。
This false statement from the U.S. side is not the first time.
在经济全球化
But
的今天，
if
美
they
方这种
can't
凭空
give
抹
us
黑、打压中国企业的做法，
convincing
可
proof,
能会对美国
these
企
facts
业
will prove wrong themselves.
造成更大的
Nowadays, the U.S. continues to combat Chinese
包括
enterprises,
中国企业在内的各
and
国
this
企业
will
对美
also
国的
damage the interests
营商
to the
环境
U.S. companies and the U.S. people,
谢谢。下面请继续提问。
and harm the confidence of Chinese enterprises and global companies in the U.S.
我是 CNBC
Thank you.
驻京记者，然后我有3个问题。第一个问题就是上周美国农业数据显示中国取
Thank
消了
you.
从美国进
I'm
口
from
的猪肉，
CBC
请
in
问中国
China.
是否会继续取消或购买美国的猪肉？如果
The
不从美国买，
U.S.
会从哪里
agriculture
来？然后第二个问
statistics
题就是
said
商务部
that
是否认为稀土可以作为
China
重要
canceled
战略资源
import from the U.S.
国际贸
in
易
terms
会
of
有
pork.
什么影响？
So
然后
is
最后
that
最后一
true?
个问题就是，
And we noticed that the
如果
Chinese
美
leaders
国
said the
针对越
rare
来越
earth
多
will
的
be
中国
a
高科技
key
公司商
strategic
务部
resource.
有
Will
核
this
检
have
量
an
和
impact
反
on the
应，
global
这对
trade?
中国经济有什么
And
影
my
响？
last
谢谢。
question is that if
谢谢
U.S.
提问。
continues to combat more and more
关于你
Chinese
提到
tech
的第一个
companies,
问题，
what kind of
我对猪
impact
肉
will
的
be on
进
China's
口
economy?
除了
Thank you.
需要符合
To
有
answer your
关
first
检验
question,
检疫的要求以外，
China's import
没
of
有任何
pork
的限制和管理措施。企
need
业
to
可以
comply
根据
with
市场
the
的供需、
quarantine
价
and
格、
inspection
质量等情况，
standards.
自主经营。
Other than this, we don't have any other
根据中国海关的统计，
requirements, and we
我国猪肉进口
encourage the enterprises to manage their pork business
美国、
on their own initiative.
丹麦、巴
And
西
China's import of pork mainly comes from Germany,
15
Spain,
个国
the
家。
U.S., the Canada, Denmark,
自2018年
Brazil
下半年以来，
Netherlands,
受到
France,
国内生猪存栏
and
和
in
猪肉
total
产
15
量下降的影
countries.
响，
Since the later half of 2018,
呈现了增长的态势。一季度
in the light of the
牛、鸡、
decreasement of the pork supply in China,
进口总量是
in the first quarter of this year, the supply of pork,
11.6%。
chicken, and
预计
beef,
后期
the total import
将
is
进一步增加。美国是我国猪肉进口的主要来源，
112,000
是否购买美国
tons,
猪肉是企
and
业
the import of this will continue to
根据
rise.
我们的了解，
Whether China
受到近期经贸摩擦
buys the pork from the U.S., that's for our own enterprise
对
to
美
decide.
国市场的预期不稳，必然
And
干
in the
扰
light of the China-U.S. trade friction,
关于你提到的
the expectation for the U.S. economy is unstable, so that accounts for the instability of the import.
一个文件，这个文件是
And to
关
answer
于
your second question,
稀土行业，
in 2011, the State Council published a document
在这个文件中的表述是这样：
on promoting
稀土
the sustainable and healthy development of the rare earth industry.
在
The document
新能
said
源、
the
新
rare
材料、
earth
节能环
is
保、航空
a
航天等
renewable
领域
strategic
进口
resource.
日益广泛。目前，
It has an impact. It's applied in
许可证环
new energy
没有资质
and
和质量
aviation,
除此之外，
new
没有其
material.
他的管理措施。
And China has given license on the export of rare earth,
我想再
but
次
we don't
强
have
调
any limitations on the export of the rare
任
earth.
何国家
To
泛
answer
化
your third
国家
question,
安全的概念，
I'd like to
反
reiterate
对动
again
用国家力量
that China
对合规经营的中国企业进行打压。
stands against
同
any
时，我们也会做好
governmental
各方面的
behavior to
关于
combat
对中国
our
经济的影响
enterprises.
我们已经说过，中国的宏
And
观政
at the
策
same time, we
还
will be
有
prepared
充分的空间，
with any precautions.
政策工具还很多。
China's macro policy
应对任何困难，
still has a lot of room.
中国的经济前景
We have
十分光明。
every confidence
下面请继续。
to meet the challenges and difficulties lying ahead.
谢谢。
And
路透
China's
社
economy has a huge
第一个问
potential.
题就是你刚刚提到了中美就是经贸
From Reuters
团队见面
My
谈判
first
的问
question
题
is,
我想问一下，就是关于中美经贸团队的沟通的问题，
on the meeting
就是
between the China-US
最近一段
trade and
时间
negotiating teams.
大概有什么样的就是沟通跟中国
So my
和
question is
美
on the
国这个
communication
经
between
贸
the
团队
negotiating teams.
它是大概多久一次？
So
能具体
recently,
说一点
did
是
you
什
have
么样的沟
any
通吗？
communications with the
然后
US
就
trade and
是
negotiating
有没
team?
有定
How frequent
就
is the
是任何日
negotiation?
期？关于
Could you give us more
就是
details about the
就是下一
negotiation?
次就是见面谈判的日期。然后第二部分就是关
Do
于
you
华为
have you
最
agreed
近
on
就
a
是韩
fixed
国媒
date
体有
on
报道，就是
the
美
next
方
trade and
游
negotiation
说韩
face to
国
face?
让韩国公司
Recently,
停
there
止
is a
跟
report
华为
from
合作。
from South
包
Korea
括日本的 Panasonic 松下有
that
说他们会
US
停止跟华为合作，还
ordered
有英
the
国的
Korean
在英国的
companies
ARM 芯
to
片公
cut
司
ties with
也
Chinese
说了
companies,
它停止跟
华为
华为合作。
including the
商务
Japan
部
and
对
the
此
UK
有什么
based
回应？谢谢。
chip solution provider
谢谢
ARM
你的提问。
to
关于
cut
提到
ties
的
with
第一个
Huawei. So what is your
刚才
take and
我已经
response?
表达了中方的立场。
Many thanks for your question.
中方对于谈判的立场，
To answer the first question,
如果美方想要
I have answered it
就应该
clearly.
拿出诚意，纠正错误。
China is clear about its
只有
stance.
在平等相待、
If the US
相互尊
wants
重
to continue with the negotiation, the US needs to show its sincerity and correct its own mistakes.
关于你提到的，
We need to respect
刚才我
each
已
other,
已经
and
说到
that is very principle for us to carry on with the negotiation.
打压中国企业，不仅
To answer the question on Huawei, I also
正
answered partly.
合作，
It is the US government
共赢
compact
安
on our
构成
com-
了严
on our company, and it harms
方
the normal business between both enterprises, and it also threatens the global
关注
supply chain.
的发展，做好
And
必要
China
的应对准备。
vows against this behavior from the US, and China will follow on with the developments of this situation and be prepared with any precautions.
媒体报道称，中国美
Thank
国
you.
商会和上海美国商会22日发布的联合调查结果显示，在华经营的
From
美国
Taixing,
企业正面临日益加剧
there
的
are
中
media
美贸易
report
争端
that
所
the
带来
China
的影响。
Business
协会员
Commerce
除了近期实施的措施以外，
Commerce
正面临
Association
通关
and
速
the
度变慢
US
检查
Commerce
更多
Association
核证审批延
are
迟等等措
discussing
施多数在华企业
the
表示有一定
negative
的中国
impact of
并
the
且
trade
多数在
negotiations
参与者称
between both
中美两国
countries,
关税
and
提
this
高会带来
do
负面
have
影响，请
impact
问中方有何
like slowing down the licensing
谢
process.
谢你的提问。我们注意到
And some said the trade tariff hikes will have some negative
发布的
impacts.
联合调查
What is
报
your
告
take?
在
Thank you for your
反馈意见
question.
的
We
会
noticed
员
that
企业当
the
中
U.S. Commerce
81.5%
Association
的
and
制造业
the
企业
Shanghai
感
Commerce
受到了
Association jointly
美方
published
加
a
征关
report
税的负面影响。
which states that
这从一个侧面
over 80% of the manufacturers in China felt the negative impact from the U.S. trade
摩擦，不仅损害中方企业，
trade friction.
严重损害。
This shows that in the globalization
我想
context,
再次强调，
the U.S. behavior,
所有
unilateral
在华的
behavior
外资企业
not only harms the interest of Chinese enterprises, but also the counterparts in the
中国政府
U.S.
的保护。
I'd like to
对于外
stress
资
that
企业反映
the
了
legitimate rights of the Chinese enterprises and also the U.S. companies in China will be protected by the Chinese
梳理、
government.
研究、
As to the business running issue
加以改进，
of the U.S. companies,
不断完善。
we will study very seriously
我们相信，中国
and try to solve
进
these
一步扩大开
issues
放
later
和
on
规模巨大
and
的
keep improving the
市场
business environment
将为
of
更
foreign
多的
companies in
外
China.
资企业带来
We are confident that China will continue with reform and opening up. This will provide more opportunities and new potential for the foreign invested companies in China.
发言人你好，第一财经日报记者提问：下个月将在日本召开的 G20 贸易部长会议将讨论 WTO 改革等主要议题。中方
From
是否已
first
经做好了相应的准备？
Financial
重
Daily
点
in
关注哪
China.
些议题？希望
So
方释放哪
next
些
month
信息
there will be a meeting to discuss the reform of WTO. Is China well prepared for this meeting, and what kind of information will be released during the meeting? Thank you for your question. The meeting will take place on the June 8th and 9th in Japan. This will be the ministerial meeting for G20 and to prepare for the G20 summit. During the trade ministers meeting for G20, there will be a coalition meeting for the digital and the economic ministers meeting. The preparation is going well in the Chinese side. We will discuss topics such as how to improve the business environment and sustainable development in business and inclusive growth, the WTO reform, and the digital economy. The Chinese side hopes to strengthen its cooperation with the G20 members and safeguard free trade and multilateralism, and work against unilateralism and trade protectionism. And we hope to make necessary reforms to WTO and to strengthen the cooperation in e-commerce in terms of digital economy. We hope to improve the business environment to make it more transparent and make new contributions to the global business environment. Thank you.
在 RCEP 的谈判中，中国现在正在向参加谈判的国家征询意见，进行一些讨论。那么中方就提出了一个不含印度的框架。那么对此，印度和日本
Now China is calling for advices on a new meeting involving India, but India and Japan has showed their disagreements. And the ASEAN said there will be no point if we exclude India. So what is your take? Thank you for your question. We have noticed these reports. The statements are not true and not fact-based. Since the inauguration of the ACE negotiation, China worked along with its partners and takes a leading role in the negotiations, and we devoted ourselves to facilitate the success and outcomes of the negotiation. And China kept in positive communication with relevant partners. We are preparing for bilateral negotiations at a vice minister level and all levels. We like to solve issues in the remaining issues on the market access on cargo and goods, so that we can make contributions to the agreement of an RCP, so that we can contribute to the global economy. The Chinese side will continue its support to ASEAN playing a leading role in the negotiation and work along with its partners to reach an early agreement to facilitate the free trade process in the region and contribute to the growth of the regional and global economy. Thank you.
21世纪经济报道提问。然后5月21号，美国商务部宣布对中国的垂直金属文件柜发起双反调查。
Thank you from 21st Century Economic Daily. On May 21st, the U.S. launched a anti-dumping investigation into China's rare earth. What is your take on this issue. We noticed that on May 21st, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced that the U.S. it began to launch an anti-dumping investigation on import of China's document holders. This is the fifth case of its kind from the U.S. side. The U.S. refuses to. We hope the U.S. side will strictly comply with the international standards and take an objective perspective on the investigation. And China will follow closely on the developments of this case and support our enterprises to protect our own interests.
Hi, just to follow up on my earlier question.
And respond to the cases.
To my other question. When you said the U.S. needs to show sincerity for talks to proceed, what specific signs or gestures of sincerity are you looking for when you say that? And the second question is, in the EU Chamber of Commerce report this week, 20% of the European companies that responded to that survey said they had been subject to forced technology transfers, and that it increased from 10% in 2017, so the problem is getting worse. And a number of them said they were currently undergoing forced technology transfer. The position of the Chinese government is that doesn't happen. There is no forced technology transfer. Have you reached out to the European Chamber of Commerce to try and deal with these questions raised by that? And what will you do in the future to make sure this doesn't continue to happen? Thank you.
您好，发言人，我想补充问一下，就是刚才您在回答说美方如果想要继续谈判的话，将要展现诚意。那么，请问就是您怎么去定义这个诚意？就哪一些他们做出的举动或者是他们的表态会让您觉得是有诚意的行为？第二个问题是关于欧盟商会最近的一份报告中指出来说，有20%的他们的会员表示在中国经商的实际过程中遇到了这种强制的技术转移的情况，可能这比前2年大概增长了前2年的这个同样反映相同数据的人大概是10%左右。那么中国政府的立场一直都说我们不存在这个强制技术转移的这个行为。那请问就是您有没有跟欧盟商会有过相关的沟通？那么您对这个问题有什么回应？谢谢。
谢谢你的提问。关于你刚才提到的第一个问题，我已经非常清楚地表达了中方的立场。
Thank you for your question. To answer the first one, I think I have made the Chinese position very clear. If the U.S. wants to continue with the negotiation, the U.S. side needs to show its sincerity, and we need to respect and treat each other on an equal footing. That is the only precondition for the continuing of the trade negotiation. To answer the second question, China has reiterated many times that the Chinese government encourages and respects the foreign invested companies in China to comply with the market rules and to go on with the technical transfer. China never forces technical transfer. We have published a new investment law that the administrative staff shall not force technical transfer through administrative means. We like to provide stronger support for the rights of the foreign invested companies in China. Thank you. Thank you from Russian satellite TV. On June 8th and 9th, the G20 minister meeting will be held in Japan. And President Xi and the Russian president will attend the meeting in St. Petersburg in the International Advanced Forum. So, can you give us more information? Thank you for your question. To our knowledge, the 23rd St. Petersburg International Economic Forum will be held in Russia on June 8th and 9th. MOFCOM supports Chinese enterprises to work and enlarge its communication and discuss cooperation and contributes to bilateral trade growth together with its Russian counterparts within the framework of this forum. This forum is one of the most important in Russia, with growing impact over the recent years. And it has become an important global platform for discuss global governance and economic growth. The Chinese enterprises will have a good opportunity to work under with the Russian counterparts, and they have delivered fruitful outcomes throughout the forum. And the Chinese side wishes that both sides can work together to tap on the potential of the enterprises to provide new opportunities for the bilateral growth. If we have more details, we will release to you. Thank you.
如果他们需要这样才能继续谈。那我想问一下
When you answered the Bloomberg question, you said if the U.S. show its sincerity, the trade negotiation will only go on if the U.S. side shows its sincerity.
或者是任何的来往，还是什么都没有？
But now, do you have any communication with the U.S. side on emails, on telecalls? Or is it that you don't have any contact with the U.S. side at all? Another question is whether President Xi meet President Trump during the G20 summit. Thank you. Thank you for your question. As I have answered, the U.S. has put us into a trade friction and harmed the China-U.S. trade negotiation. And for cooperation, we have our principles and bottom lines. China will not give up our major principles. Only based on equal footing and mutual respect will the negotiation continue. For the second question, I'd like to refer you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China.
谢谢发言人。上海证券报记者提问：西班牙银行19日公布了中国在拉美影响的报告称，近20年来，中国在拉美
Thank you from Shanghai Securities. The Spain Bank released a report on China, the impact of Chinese investment in Latin America, which says China's investment in Latin America increased by 7 times. During 2016 and 2018, the investment amounted to $15.6 billion. Could you give us some information about China's investment in Latin America? Well, thank you. Latin America and the Caribbean Sea are the natural expansion of the 21st century maritime Silk Road and indispensable partners of the Belt and Road Cooperation. So far, 19 countries from the Latin America and the Caribbean Sea area have signed MOU with China on the Belt and Road Cooperation. Although we are geographically remote from each other, our economies are highly complementary, and we have huge cooperation in the future. We are the largest trading partner to Latin America, and our trade volume amounted to over $300 billion in 2018. And Latin America has become the second largest overseas trade investment and the third largest engineering investment destination in the world. And we have made a lot of progress in the bilateral trade cooperation. For example, it has been the 10th anniversary of the China-Chile free trade agreement, and we are running a free trade agreement negotiation with another country in the Latin America. And this has proved successful in promoting and disseminating the benefits of development to our people. And China will continue to work together with Latin American countries, based on mutual consultation and mutual effort and the sharing of development results with the Latin American countries. Thank you. Any more questions on the floor? If you don't have more questions, that will be the end of today's press conference.